What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am here with Lucas Wilson, the author of Shame, Sex, Attraction, who wrote this book because he was seeing crazy stories from people about conversion therapy. And I was reading this book and also have had a lot of experience in spiritual counseling meant to change you. And so these stories were definitely just hitting my heart. So I want to have him on the book to see what inspired this book. And I also wanted to hear where he's coming from and his stories. So, Dr. Lucas Wilson, thank you for being here today.
Nate, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'd love to hear where you came from. Why did you get into writing? What inspired you? And I don't know, could you take it from the top with where would feel relevant for your story?
Well, you know what? Why I wrote the book, I think it starts when I became an evangelical. That was years ago at this point. That would have been when I was going into high school. I was really into the creation. I got really into the creation versus evolution debate, as if that, was something to talk about. But at the time I thought it was, and I was super interested. My brother got me involved. And I started watching the videos by Kent Hovind, Dr. Dino, if you know who that is. He went to jail eventually because of tax evasion. He said it was God's money, but the government disagreed, so they put him in prison. Anyway, I used to watch his DVDs, and when I was watching his DVDs, that's how I got sort of hooked into the conversation about creation versus evolution. I, of course, decided that I believed that there was a creator, and therefore, if I was to figure out who this creator was, I needed to go to church. And so I went to this church that my family had gone to on and off again when I was little. It was this Fellowship Evangelical Baptist Church, which is the Canadian equivalent, essentially, of like the Southern Baptist. It's quite conservative. And so I went to a youth group one Wednesday evening, church just before that, and the rest was history. I sort of got hooked and sucked in, and I didn't really leave that world up until when I was about 26, 27. And then I finally made my exit. But that's how I got involved in the church. While I was in high school, I decided that I was going to go to none other than Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia.
It was worth coming all the way down here for that, eh?
Well, you know what? This was it. It was like when it's true. Like everything in the States is bigger and everything in the States is more exciting, at least in comparison to Canada. Canada is very mild-mannered, right? So
I love Canada.
Me too. She's a good country. But for me as a young evangelical, I wasn't even planning on going to Liberty. I was planning to go to this little Bible college out in Saskatchewan until I decided that wasn't a good idea. Instead, I was going to, just go to University of Toronto, which is, I'm from Toronto. So I was, my mom's my mom's cousin, who's, we just called him Uncle Gary. He was the national recruiter for Liberty in Canada. And so he said, Luke, you should come down for this visit to Liberty. And I was like, no chance in hell. Like, I don't want to go to Lynchburg, Virginia. Even as a high school, kid, I didn't want to go to the South. And so he was like, no, come down. It'll be fun. So, okay. So I went down, and I got on that campus, and it's huge. Like, it's squeaky clean. It's, these manicured lawns and gardens. And I thought at the time it was a beautiful school. I think today it's got awful, but for a number of reasons, including the aesthetics. But I got down there, and it was just bigger, and it was more exciting than anything I had ever seen, and it was Christian. So, I thought, it must be better if it's Christian. And so I kind of got hooked, and then I decided that I needed to go there. And so that's where I went, which leads into the story about how the book, came about, but we'll talk more about that.
I'm half Canadian, so I love you sound pretty Canadian, and I love it. I love all my cousins are Canadian, so I spent months in Canada, and yes, confirmed you are Canadian. You say all the things, and it's fantastic. Actually, I was curious. So you pushed heavily into the church later on, and you were in it when you were younger, but when did you find out you were queer, and did you not have that battle between your queerness and your faith until you were older?
No, so when we were really young, like when we were, up until about grade 2 or 3, we went to church on and off again. Like it was not a common or a regular thing. We would just go, whenever my dad never wanted to go. My dad never took us unless my mom was taking us. And so we would go. So I had this exposure to church. And so it wasn't like I really knew much about it. I didn't really, I don't have too many like solid memories of my time in church as a kid. So I think by the time I got to high school, which I was already aware that I was a big old homosexual. Like I knew that I was, gay since since a very young age.
Your situation felt more or less comfortable being queer where you were? Like, you didn't have any hindrance because you weren't that religious, right?
I would say that I wouldn't have had any hindrance had it not been for my mom. My dad was this like hippity dippity, pot smoking, record store owning musician.
So like every Canadian, right? That's like most Canadians, from what I've heard.
That's
no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
That's it. Keith Wilson is the archetypal Canadian. But no, I think that for me it was my mom. My mom was not like she was. I always say she was haunted by her Baptist demons. Like she grew up in a religious home. And because of that, she sort of, held on to certain weird things, like taking us to church. And so I think that for me, I knew from a very young age, it would not be okay to come out to my mom because she made a number of comments, throughout my childhood that made it very clear that it would not be all right to be gay. So I think for me, in part, not that I was thinking about it consciously, but I think in part why I eventually even got into the church was a way of saying, well, I can't be a Christian and gay, so therefore I'm a Christian, therefore I'm not gay. And then, that would solve the problem as if, there was a problem to solve, and B, as if it worked that way. But I think that for me, it was a way of covering over my sexuality and therefore safeguarding me against my mom's ire. And it seemed like a foolproof plan. Looking back, I have a different perspective, but at the time, I think this was subconsciously or unconsciously what was going on in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have our different ways of coping with how to fit in the wants of our parents' desires and whatever's happening internally. I think most of us will give up what we want for the sake of acceptance and, well, having your parents think you're doing the right thing, doing good, because that's your number one motivation as a kid, like acceptance from parents. So that makes sense. It tracks pretty well. So you kind of just stayed closeted all the way up until you were like in your mid-20s? Is that what happened?
Yeah, so I didn't come out in high school for, again, reasons relating to my mom. I didn't come out at Liberty for very obvious reasons. And when I got into grad school, I went first back home to the school in Ontario called McMaster, and I was there. And it was there that I started to explore my sexuality, and I started to recognize that things weren't changing, because I went through conversion therapy at Liberty. That was where it happened for the 4 years I was in attendance.
We need to dig back into that after you finish what you're saying now.
And then I was at Mac, and I thought, I need to figure this out. So I went to div school after that, and I went down to Vanderbilt. And it was there in Nashville that I think for me that was the first time that I really put my theology. Theology took a back seat as opposed to my lived experience. So in the past, all throughout high school, all throughout Liberty, I put my theology first. Like that was going to determine how I acted, how I conducted myself. However, in Nashville, I was like, no, I'm going to first live and then theorize or theologize. And at the end of the day, theology is just theory. I would theorize later about my sexuality as it related to my sexual or my religious commitments. And so it was in Nashville that I really came out, and I was 25. And then from 25 to 27 was when I eventually left the church. But there's, we can talk about that after. But I think we should, maybe we can return to Liberty if that's of interest.
Let's go back to Liberty. I would love to go back there. Well, I think that you obviously went there and were trying fully to go the straight and narrow way, and obviously didn't work out. And so Liberty has an actual conversion therapy program.
Yeah, there was, he is no longer there. I have, what's the word? I'm quite confident that they still have a program. However, I cannot confirm that, so I'm not going to exceed or step over that boundary. But what I will say is for around 20 years, Liberty had a conversion therapy program, and it was led by a man. His name was Dane Emmerich, Pastor Dane Emmerich. He was a paid university employee who for a long time was the dean of men. And then he eventually switched into this pastoral care role where he was tasked with two things. One, working with those who were addicted to pornography, and research, of course, suggests that no one's addicted to pornography. And then he was also tasked with working with another group of folks who were addicted, quote unquote, to homosexuality. Again, the research is clear. And so these were the two groups that he worked with, and he did do group conversion therapy, and he also did this group for those who were, quote unquote, struggling with porn addictions. And I love it because, like, evangelicals, they look at porn once a month because they, finally just can't take it, and they bottle up all their, repressed sexual energy, and then they masturbate once a month, and then they're like, I'm addicted. It's like, I don't think that's how addiction works, but okay. And so
right.
Then but he also had this one-on-one program. So he would meet with queer students who were, again, struggling with homosexuality or same-sex attraction, as he put it. And that's really where the bulk of my experience was in the individual program, because I went to the group, but I only went to the group once. Whereas for the individual program, I went through all 4 years of my undergrad.
So this is a school-sponsored conversion therapy on campus. And I imagine some of the parents don't even know, because a lot of these schools, the parents are paying for the tuition. They don't even know that you're in there getting conversion therapy half the time.
Yeah. Cheryl, my mom, she didn't know. I was terrified of her finding out. No. And I remember before I went, because what happened was, my big idea when I was going to Liberty, because I went to Liberty in large part because I knew that they had this man, Pastor Dane Emmerich, who worked with queer students. And I thought to myself, well, I need to go there because that's going to be my ticket, out of homosexuality and into, godly normalcy. I went down there and I was like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to, go to see this guy. However, I didn't think I was going to go meet with him right away. I thought I was going to meet with him my senior year, because my big idea was, because again, I wasn't raised in the church. So I always had 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but for the most part in, but there was I had a little bit of critical distance. And I thought to myself, well, in high school, I can't do anything. I can't go on dates or hook up with, guys who aren't Christians, because that's going to give Jesus, a bad name. It's going to be bad PR. I'm going to have a bad witness. Instead, what I thought, I'll wait till I get to Liberty. And at Liberty, because everyone's Christian, I can hook up with whoever I want, have my fun, and then by the end of it, I can go and switch my sexuality, become straight, and then, marry a woman, any woman will do, and off to Canada I'll go again. That was my big idea. It didn't work out like that, strangely enough. What happened was that on my dorm, there were, the resident, the student leadership model had the, RAs under them, spiritual life directors under them, prayer leaders, and then the rest of us plebeians who weren't, spiritual enough to, hold a leadership position. And so one day I was making my bed and I was standing there in just my tighty whities. I was too Scottish or cheap to throw these out. I thought that they were boxer briefs, but they were just briefs. And I didn't know the difference at the time. In like 2008, this was not a cute look. And so, but again, I was like, I'm not going to throw them out. I'm not going to waste my mom's money. Anyway. So I'm standing there making my bed. It was a loft bed and I was standing on my dresser and I'm making the bed. And all of a sudden I hear from behind me, and the door was open. I hear, "Hey, Luke," and I turn around, and sure enough, it's one of my spiritual life directors, and he's chit chatting with me, and he's like, "Nice underwear," and I'm like, "Wait, what?" Like, and I had never flirted before, right? Like, I was, even though I went to like Rosedale Heights School of the Arts for high school, like the writing was on the wall. It was a big old queer, but I never flirted. Like, I didn't have that experience, and so I'm standing there, and we're talking, and I'm like, am I flirting with him? Like, is this what's happening? Like, I had tried to flirt with girls, and it went, very poorly, as one would expect. But with guys, it had never happened. So I'm standing there, like, sort of unsure what exactly is happening. And he's like, "What are you doing Friday?" And I said, "Hanging out with you." And he's like, "Cool, let's do it." And he like kind of like walked back, like pulled his backpack back, and off he went. Smooth move. So I was again shocked, and I'm thinking like, is this what I think it is? Anyway, long story short, it was exactly what I thought it was. And we had this really bizarre, like, what do you call it? Like, hookup, essentially. And afterwards, he would not talk to me. So because he wouldn't talk to me, I was super sad. I was super bummed. And I was like, well, I have no one else I can really talk to. I had one friend eventually who I talked to about this a little bit with. But other than him, I didn't really have anyone. I didn't want to burden him. So I was like, well, I might as well fast track my plan and go meet with Pastor Dane. And that's how I got involved, was through all this tomfoolery.
Dang. Dang. So you're at a Christian university and you find someone that comes on to you within like weeks of being there. Mm-hmm. And then you felt bad about all of that. So then you're like, well, I guess I better hit the conversion therapy hard and fast.
Well, that's it. And, that whole story even started when you prompted, or you made me think of when I eventually went and I contacted Pastor Dane. I was like, hey, when, if I come and talk to you, will I get in trouble? And I'd made a fake email because I thought, what if he like tracks my Liberty email and then like, contacts the administration or contacts my mom? And I said to him, I was like, will my mom find out? And he was like, no, as long as you're not going to physically self-harm, you're fine. And so I said, okay, then let me go meet with you. And so that was what began us meeting for the 4 years that I met with him.
Damn. So 4 years, yeah. And obviously still gay. But so what was that experience like? What did you like? What were the takeaways? I guess, what is the actual, because some people don't really know what conversion therapy is like. And obviously, it's not a science, so it varies depending on where you're at. And a lot of it gets crazy. What was your experience like with conversion therapy?
Well, first of all, it was a lot of fun. No, I jest. It was awful.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was, imagine that, like plot twist. No, it was terrible. I mean, this is the thing. I always say that the violence of conversion therapy, at least for me, came afterwards. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So I would meet with him on a regular basis, and we would, in the beginning of our meetings, it started off, he was sort of trying to like frame the rest of our meetings by way of like a very pseudo-Freudian approach to human sexuality, where it was really blaming my parents in some way, shape, or form for me being gay. Yeah. So the way that it typically works is that, for gay guys, that you have an overbearing mother or an absentee, emotionally distant, abusive father. I had one of those. My mom was wildly overbearing. So Cheryl, the wild woman that she is, she fit the bill. Whereas Keith, my dad was this again, he was just this dream. And I was arguably closer to him, even though I was a mama's boy. So it kind of didn't really fit the narrative.
Because you had a strong emotional connection with your dad and he was nurturing, so that piece didn't fit.
No, and I love it because never look for consistency with evangelicals or white Christian fundamentalists or any of these folks, right? There's a logic to their hatred, but there's not a consistency, which it's at least fun to poke, poke at.
And any of those logics you can question for a second and it doesn't make sense. And then all of a sudden they just flip it. So you can never actually say, well, a lot of these cases don't line up with that, but they just flip it on its head and somehow we're talking about something else. And you're like, cool, I guess you just believe whatever you want to believe, say what you want to say. And then if anyone has evidence, you're just gonna be like, what? I don't know. Something else is going on. Anyways.
That's it. It's like, I always think about it. It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet. They take what they want and leave what they don't, right? And so for this, I mean, again, part of the narrative works. So we went with that. Dane and I, went with the narrative that my mom was overbearing, and this must be the root cause of me being a big old homo. And so, and again, at the time, I didn't conceptualize it like that. I very much understood myself as a straight person, which the mental gymnastics are wild. A straight person who struggled with same-sex attraction. So
naturally,
it makes sense, right? So he and I, would meet and we would talk about these things. But really, after the first few meetings where we established my relationship with my parents and my siblings and, friends, and also he asked a lot of really invasive questions about my porn habits and masturbation habits and what I was into. Did I like daddies? Did I like, guys my age? What were my, interests? And of course,
you're like, are we flirting right now?
Dane, is this a date? I don't know what's happening. Yeah.
You're just me with the conversion therapist. They get so into your, weird questions. Such weird questions. You feel almost one of my therapists, hey, this is a really weird thing. He's like, oh, am I, I saw your eyes, because he's talking about what I'm into and, getting into all that. And he's like, I saw your eyes, light up a little at that one thing. And he's like, was that, a reaction? I'm like, ew. And maybe, but also what are you doing? This is so invasive. Anyways.
Yeah. It's well, again, we talked about it before, evangelicals don't have personal boundaries. And so I think that there's just, and you're primed for that. The culture of conservative Christianity it celebrates and in many ways necessitates you to be someone who does not have personal boundaries. So in the first 5 minutes you meet an evangelical, they'll tell you, they voted for Trump, that they have a porn addiction, and, that their wife, and they'll talk about something about their wife, and you're like, your wife's right there. What? And so it's just, this is sort of how, you know what I mean? It's so bizarre. The what's the word? The necessity to really open up, and you want to be best friends within 5 minutes and tell each other everything.
Yeah. Trauma dumping gets you there, and it's faith in Christianity, so it's fine. Wait, so you told you're telling all your therapists this. He's getting into all these invasive questions. And what were you going to say next? Before I interrupted.
No. So he asked all these questions. So this was again the foundation for the meetings that would come. And so the other parts, and speaking of personal boundaries not being respected, a big part of what we would do when we would meet is that there was this tactile aspect. And I'm not saying that he would grope me per se, but every time we met, he would have this he would greet me with a big bear hug, and then we would conclude our meeting with a big bear hug. So that was always part of it. And I always sort of understood it as him like tutoring me and like, this is how men can touch each other in non-sexual ways. And I think it was him trying to like teach me that. But the other part was that whenever he prayed for me, and he would always pray for me, he'd either put his hand on my shoulder or on my leg. And when he put his hand on my leg, I remember I was talking to a friend about this, years later, and he said, and he also met with Dane. He said it was never far up enough that it was like, hey, don't do that, but it was never far down enough that you didn't clock it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're like, this something about this.
Wait, do you think he was gay?
Oh, I know he was. He's one
of the gay conversion therapists. He's a success story. Oh my God, why do people? That's so crazy that people are having them mentor younger gay men when they're suppressed. Like, what the actual hell? Anyways, so he's grabbing your mid to upper thigh. Okay.
Yeah. So I do have a funny story about this. Is how I found out from another number of other people who went and met with him that he told them he was gay. But I have another like really funny anecdotal moment where it was confirmed, and I'll tell you about that after. It's just great. And so we would have these meetings, and again, the tactile aspect, the breathing, whatever, and then the praying, and then we'd read scripture together. And we also read a book called, my book was Alan Medinger's Growth into Manhood, Resuming the Journey. And Alan Medinger was the former president of Exodus International. And so we'd read this book and talk about this, bullshit. And again, we would also have take like a weekly inventory of my weekly victories and slip-ups. Victories were moments where I avoided temptation, and slip-ups were moments that I gave into temptation. And again, he was seemingly much more interested in my slip-ups, because it was always like, so what did you like? Tell me more about the website you looked at. And the best part was that at the time I was at Liberty, I had, because I'm Canadian and we learned French, I knew like French porn websites. And so Liberty has an anti-porn blocker, but they didn't have an anti-porn blocker for anything that was other than English. So I would just go on the French websites, and that's how I would access, the websites. But he was always sort of surprised, like, how do you find this stuff? And I was like, well, let me tell you. But I actually don't even know if I ever told him that, but that was certainly how it happened. So
is your sexual French speaking better than your regular French speaking? Like, do you have a very wide sexual French vocabulary?
I think so at this point.
Do you ever break into it when you're like flirting with someone and you just like are like making out and then you say something in French? Does this ever happen to you?
It's, I've learned Portuguese over the past like few years, and now my French is completely erased. So I don't actually I don't know. My brain's not smart enough. It doesn't have enough of the capacity to hold more than barely 2 languages. And so
you can't do 3.
I can't do 3. I can read French. I just can't speak it anymore, and I can understand it. But if you expect me to respond, it's impossible. But Portuguese, I feel quite confident in my ability to say things. So
this is the era of your Portuguese porn.
This is, and Grindr was my we'll go there later. So I had this. So we had these meetings, but again, for me, like the thing was about meeting with Dane. Whenever we would meet, I always felt reassured in the moment, because it felt like, okay, I am on the right path. I'm doing the right thing. Even though I had these slip-ups or I've done something, bad this week, I'm still pursuing God. I'm still going in the right direction, and therefore I'm fine. And I always felt, because I was meeting with him and he was constantly, quote unquote, encouraging me to keep going, that again, I was making progress. I mean, no, like I was still like gay as hell, obviously, and still am gay as hell, spoiler alert. But at the time, I thought I was making this progress. So when I got back to Ontario, when I went to move to Hamilton, Ontario, where McMaster was, it was there that it set in that things weren't changing. And I didn't have that constant reassurance that all was well, God's on his throne, and the rest is history. I didn't have this. And so for me, I really felt like all of a sudden I started realizing, okay, if in fact I believe that God is, perfect, and at the time I believed that God was perfect, and God wants me to change and I'm not changing, the problem's not God. The problem is obviously me. And of course, when you see yourself as a problem, that's a problem. And so for me, that's really where the violence of conversion practices happened and sort of set in, because it was then that the guilt that I had felt before, because before I felt guilt, like, oh, I feel bad about, looking at porn, or I feel bad about masturbating, that one discrete thing that I had done, I feel bad about that. Not about me as a person, and guilt really is, you feel bad about one thing you've done, like a specific discrete action. Whereas shame is where you as a person are bad. It's not just that you've done something bad, it's that sort of like negative emotion or negative energy turns inwards on the self, and you as a human being are bad. And so that's where I really thought that I think that like the guilt turned to shame, and the shame turned to self-hatred. The self-hatred turned into, compounded from there. And I think that for me is why I always say that conversion practices or conversion therapy, the violence of it happened after, because again, it was then that I really turned on myself, because before I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was on the right path. But once I realized nothing was changing, that's when I realized, okay, again, I'm the problem. And again, that's a problem when you see yourself like that.
No, that makes perfect sense, because there's already so much shame growing up and being different. There's levels. You hear it in the church when you're a kid. You feel, so depending on what kind of culture, and you feel secluded. The other boys treat you different. There's all these levels where you're internalizing shame, and you're just, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. The church is saying it. The kids are saying it. I have a problem. So you're unpacking that no matter what. But I think when you go into conversion therapy as an adult, you're just reaffirming that shame. Oh, this is wrong. Oh, this is bad. Oh, and then I think you're doubling down, because not only am I this shameful thing, but I can't change it. At least I think when you're a kid, you have hope that, okay, this is just a phase. I've got this thing wrong with me, but it's going to be fixed soon. I'm going to change at some point. That's going to be fine. I think when you're in conversion therapy or some sort of adult program, you're like, okay, not only am I shameful, am I wrong, but I think I just lost hope that I'm going to change. So what do I do when I have to carry this shame forever, when I'm always going to be a shameful, gross being? And I think that probably just destroys you. I mean, it destroyed me. I think that's what you need regular therapy for after. So you would say when you were in conversion therapy, it was primarily more on the counseling thing. It was just building up, this is why you're like this. This is why it's wrong to be like this. It's very much talk. Because we know we've heard therapy where it gets a little funky. Like, I'm sure you've seen Boy Erased. Those are true stories of stuff that happened in the Exodus movements, where they like put the kid in a coffin and be like, this is what your like death is going to be like, and just really dramatic stuff. We've heard stories in your book. There's quite a few stories of more dramatic stuff, because it gets wild in the evangelical church when you don't have any leader, like any psychologist, and you're practicing some pseudopsychology. So for you, it was mostly talk therapy that's slowly edging into your brain. Yes.
Yeah, it was mostly talk. And part of that too, like part of like the exercises I would do at the time, he would tell us we needed to do the things that men do, and of course, what he means by men, he means straight men. We need to do the things that men do in order to become straight. And so, and they would always say, like, it's not a matter of what you do that makes you straight; it's a matter of what you do that makes you straight. And you're like, wait a second, did I just hear like double speak? Because of course I did. And they would say like, okay, you need to go play sports, or you need to do woodwork like Jesus, like carpentry. I was like, oh my God, like you're asking me to do woodwork? Like, do you know what you're asking? And so they would push us in the direction of doing these like manly things. And, I remember one time it was the group conversion therapy, and this is in the book, this is in Shame, Sex, Attraction, because there's 16 stories of other survivors, and then there's my story. My story, I talk about how when we were at this group, or when I say we, it was this guy who I had a big crush on, who did not have a crush on me, but he was my friend and sort of friend zoned me very, very quickly. But I was like, let's go to this group together. So we went to this group, and we were there, and Dane was like, yeah, this weekend, the group, like, we're all going to go on a hike and like be men together and be sweaty together. I'm like, oh my God, like the homo, like erotic and homo, like social undertones and overtones are just wild. But he was like, who's coming with me? And I remember I got to this group because I always wanted to know, like, who's in this group on campus? Because everyone knew that there was a group, but no one knew who was in it. No one knew where they met. No one knew when they met. But everyone on campus knew that there was this underground, not underground because it was publicized, but this gay group. And so I was all excited to go. And so when I finally got there and I saw who was in the group, I was like, God damn it. Like, no, like, I don't want to hook up with any of these guys. And of course, I was in part there because I wanted to change, but I was also, the flesh was weak, right? I was a college student. And so I was also trying to figure out who are the queers. You know what I mean? And so I think that for me, when he was like, who wants to go on this hike? I was like, no chance in hell. That's why I only went once to this group, because I was like, okay, I figured out who's in this group. I'm only interested in one guy, and that's what the story is about when in the collection. And otherwise, I was like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm kicking stones. I'm gone. Like, I'm never coming back. Because again, it was just like not the group of guys that you were hoping for. You know what I mean? When you're a gay, closeted liberty student. So yeah.
So you obviously tried conversion therapy. Did it for a few years. Had some fun along the way. But then after you're done, you committed to the bit. And that's when you started to realize, I'm not changed. And so late 20s, you start to dig into what do I do now? Yes.
Yeah, so that's when, so I always say like grad school or like academia saved my life, because I honestly think had I not gone to grad school, I would have been, married to a woman with kids and living a very unhappy life. I'm very thankful that didn't happen the way that it could have happened. And so I got to grad school. This is where I started like learning about, learning first and foremost. I mean, Liberty's education was wildly disappointing, as one could only expect. And I started, taking classes that were legitimate and, with proper, training or trained folks who were properly trained. And I, at first I was like, what's the word? So lost. Like I had no idea what anyone was talking about in my classes. It was so like over my head. And the thing was, I even said to my thesis supervisor, because what happened was when I was writing my thesis proposal for my master's, typically you get rejected once, maybe twice, or you just get accepted on the first try. I was rejected 7 times. It was only on the 8th try that I got accepted, which is like unheard of. That should never, ever, ever happen. And I went to my supervisor and I said, hey, I promise you I'm not stupid. I just haven't clearly been trained properly. Can you just help me? And he did. And it was, he did a lot more work than he was paid to do, which was quite nice. But, I was just sort of like a fish out of water because I had no academic proper training. And the thing was, I graduated in my high school close to the top of my class. I graduated from Liberty at the top of my class, which was, again, not hard. That's not bragging. That's just, it was Liberty. And so I wasn't like a stupid kid, and I just didn't know what the hell I was doing. And so once I got into, McMaster, and then I was working through all, my thesis, and then eventually when I got to Vandy, like everything worked out. But at the time, it was this big sink or swim moment. But for me, the important part, to answer your question, is that I started encountering theories and ideas and, texts that I had never been introduced to before that started to allow me to begin the deconstruction process of my faith. I really was, again, just sort of blindly, in a lot of ways, committing to the evangelical sort of like faith tradition. And it was there that I was being challenged finally. And I was also, again, meeting people in a very, like I went to a public high school. So like it wasn't that I didn't have non-Christian friends. I had a lot of friends who weren't Christians. It was that I had never had sustained academic or sort of like rigorous conversations and theoretical conversations that allowed me to see the holes in my cosmology and see the holes in my worldview. And so it was there that I really started to, again, deconstruct. And again, by the time I got to Nashville, that was where I really began to, again, theorize theorize second and live first. And what I mean by that is that up until that point, I very much was putting my theology, and again, theology is, of course, theory, first. And that's how evangelicals live. They live according to this theory of, the world, this theological sort of like worldview. And then they try to, shoehorn their lives into this theory and make it fit when, half the time it doesn't, especially for those of us who are big old queers. And so when I got to Nashville, I was like, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to instead live first, just live as whoever I am, whatever that means. And at the time, I still didn't even know if I was gay or if I was bisexual. I was very much not bisexual, but
we always question that.
That was it. And so I decided that, this is how I was going to live my life. Because again, at this point, I was living in a city that no one knew me except for one person. And she was not connected to really me at all, other than the church that I went to, like 2 or 3 times that I stopped going. So I was able to just be myself in a place where no one knew me and just sort of, what's the word? Allow myself to self-actualize. And I still remember I had not told anyone at Vanderbilt that I was gay. And again, I'm assuming people knew pretty quickly, but I remember I made a few friends and we went out for beers, we'd hang out and having fun. We were all looking for friends because we're all new to the city anyways. And I made friends mostly with these guys from California who had gone to undergrad together. And so we went, one night we were like, hanging out, and I said, we should go dancing. And they were like, yeah, let's go dancing. And so I said, there's a cool bar, and it was the gay bar. I was like, there's a cool bar that I know of. Maybe we should go there. And they were like, oh, sure. And they were very, gay affirming. Everyone was, other than maybe like 2 or 3 homophobes, but no one really talked to them. Yeah. And we go to this bar, and again, I still hadn't come out. And so we're all there. And for me, like, my problem is whenever I go anywhere social, I'm a terrible, what's the word? friend, because I just want to like meander and like explore and like who's around, like let me see what's going on. So I kind of got lost in the crowd for who knows how long. And then I finally got my friend's family. They're like, Luke, oh, there you are. They're like, do you want to get going? And at this point, I had met a guy, and I'm standing next to him, and we're both just standing next to each other. And I was like, no, I'm good. And they were like, oh, okay. And this was my coming out moment to my friends, and so that's how I kind of came out in Nashville. But yeah,
dang. I think that part of your story is really interesting because at Liberty, I think you're still, again, they don't dig too deep into theology in some regards, especially when you found out when you went into like a deep theological program. But I think it's interesting hearing that people that once they dive into theology, they start to really pull apart the Bible and actually look at it from a scholarly view and think about what it means, the context, the translations. I think so many of us in the Christian faith are just using what is taught commonly and using what our particular circle believes. And so many stories you hear, even theologians that aren't even talking about all this, they have a different understanding of the scripture. They understand that what we're doing right now in American Christianity is how we interpret it and how we live it. But there's been a lot of different ways that people have been living out of the same core book, which is the Bible, because you have to take some liberties with the material because it's not a perfect like rule book for today. So I think you're probably, so what you're getting out of Liberty, you're going to a normal school. First, you're realizing that your lived experience isn't matching with what the gay lived experience is said to have been when you're in a place like Liberty. And then you're also all of a sudden seeing theology from a whole different perspective because you're getting the ins and outs of where all this context came from and what the subtext is and all that, right? So this is all kind of happening at once, and you're just like, wait a second, what have I been doing my whole life? That was kind of the switch for you. Is that kind of a correct analysis?
Yeah, I still remember being in my Hebrew Bible course, and of course Christians and evangelicals refer to the Hebrew Bible as the Old Testament. But I was in this course, and I still remember I was sitting in one of the back rows of this big lecture hall, and I just had this moment where everything just sort of came together, which for those outside of the church, this doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but for those of us who were in the church, of course, this is a big deal. I remember thinking, I don't think that the Bible is God's word. I think instead these are words about God. And that sounds like so minor and so like, what's the difference? But that was this profound shift for me that allowed me really the permission to begin to say, although this, and at the time I still believed that the Bible was a holy text. I believed that this was, sacred. But I did not, at that point, from that point forward, understand it in the same terms that I did before, as according to a literalist interpretation. Instead, I thought to myself in that moment, no, this still is important. This is a book that I want to, in some ways follow or use to help me, navigate this world. However, it is not what it was to me like 5 minutes ago. And that, again, it was this world, like I felt like the world just sort of like expanded and started shifting. It was this like really, monumental moment for me in that at that time. And I think it allowed me again to begin to really exit the restrictive and strict, theology that I had, adopted for myself or had been given from the evangelical church. And it allowed me, again, this before the things were already in motion, again, at McMaster, but at Vanderbilt, that's when things really started to click. And and it was all at the same time that I was living as opposed to theorizing. And I was like, okay, I'll just theorize later. But again, all these things were working in tandem and concert with one another that really allowed me, again, to begin to really shift how I understood scripture, how I understood God, how I understood myself.
And that changes everything. And I think you realize once you go into leadership of a church or anything in those veins, you start to notice that a lot of theologians and a lot of pastors don't necessarily believe everything is verbatim. And if you really read the Bible, you're like, oh, there's a lot of this that we're not following verbatim. And you'll throw a bunch of scriptures at us that you say are verbatim, but then these other ones you've disregarded. So once you start to really dig in as an adult with critical thinking, you're like, okay, whether you want to believe the Bible full-heartedly or not, you do have to say, I can't just say everything it says we're following, and this is all 100%. So, like, there's got to be some... It's almost like most people in the church are just living kind of in a cognitive dissonance of, faith explains everything. Everything's totally good. We don't have to think about faith. And it's like, no, if you have a faith, you need to challenge it and not reject it, but exercise that. What am I believing in? Why do I believe it? Am I believing it out of my own research, own development? Do I actually know what's going on, or am I just taking someone else's word for it? So you find a lot of stories like that. It's not just you.
But you know what? It's so funny, and this just builds on your point. You know, you have all these like armchair theologians, all these like biblical studies scholars, you know, in all these evangelical churches who have never taken a course. And I'm not saying that necessarily you need to take a course in order to have a literacy or a strong grasp of a topic. However, I think to myself, the vast majority of theologians out there and biblical studies scholars don't believe what evangelicals believe. Like the vast majority are like they hold very different beliefs. And these are people who have dedicated their lives to studying these texts. And it's funny because you have people who are like, okay, and I mean, I say what I'm about to say, but I will give a caveat that there are, of course, so many people who are like anti-vaxxers, anti-science, anti-whatever. But there are so like when we put our faith as if that's not the term. When we go to a doctor and the doctor treats us, again, they have a knowledge base that allows them to do that, and we trust them. Why? Because they have years and years of study of specifically medicine that allows them to, that gives them a knowledge that allows them to practice, what they're doing, and therefore we trust them. Whereas it's so funny that so many evangelicals, whenever it's like, oh, here's like a theologian or here's a biblical studies scholar, and they don't, they immediately are suspicious if they're not evangelical. They're like, I don't think I trust them because they're obviously heretics, they're obviously liberal or progressive or whatever. And it's just crazy because it's like, these are the same people who are putting, like their trust in doctors, but they're not putting their trust in other doctors when it comes to like these holy matters. But again, they're the experts. It's just wild, right? Like the hubris of it all.
Absolutely. And most of our pastors don't have theology degrees. Like a lot of the pastors will go to a school like Liberty and kind of just stay in the same mindset, not really think through their faith, think why they believe what they believe, and just kind of run on the energy that was before them. And it's like, okay, it kind of makes sense why we are this closed mindset bubble in the way we think, because we're not really exposing ourselves to alternative perspectives. But I wanted to, back into the book, I wanted to talk about what made you start to get passionate about fighting back against conversion therapy, because that's what this book is. It is getting into why conversion therapy is harmful. Was there a particular story or something that you were hearing? Like, how did you start collecting these stories? Where did this journey start and, I guess, end?
So initially I started writing about my experience of conversion therapy, not necessarily, to be completely honest, the reason was that I was, for a long time, most of my research in the past was in Holocaust studies. People always think of, if people know who I am, which most people don't, but if someone knows who I am, they think of my work, my conversion therapy work. However, most of my research is actually on intergenerational trauma. It's the transmission of trauma between Holocaust survivors, their kids and their grandkids, and also the theological sort of like antecedents of the Holocaust. So I look at like what happened before the Holocaust and what happened after the Holocaust. Really, I don't really do much with what happened during. And so with this work, I was in a field, I was in Jewish studies, I was in Holocaust studies. And anytime someone saw my CV, my resume, and saw Liberty University, they were like, oh no. Like immediately their alarms sort of go off, right? So I thought, well, I need to separate myself from this school. I don't want people seeing anything that I do and thinking, oh, he must be one of like Jerry Falwell's, cronies. And so I first wrote this article for Queerness, just about my experience of conversion therapy, because I wanted to separate myself from Liberty. And once that article came out, it had more of a splash than I was expecting. And that snowballed into another article, and into these podcasts, and it just sort of kept snowballing. And it was great. I was like super excited. And then eventually I had someone, an archivist I was working with. He's like, the work you do about, children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, you can do this work about evangelicals too. And I was like, I never thought about that. Like I just had it never crossed my mind that I would do that. So I started working on this in an academic sense as well. Well, as I was working on this in an academic sense, while still doing the work that I was doing in Holocaust studies, I had a publisher just reach out on Twitter. And at first I thought it was a scam. I was like, there's no way that like a publisher's reaching out to me, like as if. And sure enough, it turned out to be legitimate, and it was the publisher that eventually, published Shame, Sex, Attraction. And it was this editor who was just this fabulous editor, and he said, like, would you want to put together this book? We've been following your public facing work on conversion therapy. Would you want to do this? And I was like, hell yeah, I want to do this. And so we sort of negotiated the terms, and my big idea, not my big idea, my one requirement for the collection was that only survivors are included. I didn't want anyone coming in who wrote about conversion therapy but wasn't a survivor. I didn't want anyone who, wrote about it fictionally. And so all the folks in the collection are survivors. Garrett Conley, the one who wrote Boy Erased, he wrote the foreword to the collection. And so, and again, he's obviously a survivor. And so that's how it came about. And it was just about, a year and a half, that the whole thing, sort of the process of putting out a call for papers or for chapters, accepting or declining, the submissions, and then from there working with the others. So a lot of the work that people don't see, and for good reason, because no one wants to see like a draft of what's happened or these stories, is that I worked with authors over like multiple drafts, saying like, hey, let's fix this, or let's change this, let's make this a little bit, let's just frame this a little bit differently. So we didn't change the content, just changed the form in some ways, just to make it publishable. And then the book came out, and then we've it's been fun now that the book's in the world and people are responding to it.
Most of us don't realize how much of this is still going on, and it feels like something in the past, but like Bethel, where I went to ministry school, like they're still doing something that's very conversion therapy-esque, and they're very popular. They're very just mainstream happy. There's a lot of ministries like Liberty that are still doing this today. And that's why this book is important because, well, first off, I think we can obviously clearly say like conversion therapy didn't work. We've known so many people that have done. We've known people that have taken their lives because of these practices. Like we have seen so much of the harm, and nobody is really talking about it as much as they should be because this is pretty devastating. And I think we're talking recently, like there's something in, was it Tennessee, where they're trying to push back some of the restrictions against conversion therapy. I think you mentioned something like that. Like this is an active war that we all need to, it's like there's so many things going on right now, but like we need to be engaged in this. So I guess thank you for writing this book. Thank you for bringing light to all of this. It's really important. I have a lot of attached to this project, especially.
And you think, and you're absolutely right. Like conversion practices are not a thing of the past. It's so wild. The number of folks who have asked me like, so does conversion therapy still happen? And you're like, what? Yeah. Of course it still happens, right? You're like, well, it's illegal in Canada. It's like, do you think that like just because drugs are illegal in Canada, people don't do drugs? Like crime, and this is crime. I don't think drugs should be criminalized, but that's a different story. Crime is going to always continue. It's going to continue to happen. It's just going to go underground, right? And that's what we found in Canada. The organizations who practice conversion therapy, really, it's happening behind closed doors now. It's always happening behind closed doors, but they're not advertising it in the same way. And so, whether we're talking about Tennessee or Kentucky or North Carolina or wherever, right, conversion practices still happen. And of course, what it's sort of terrifying given the way that the Supreme Court is stacked in the U.S. right now. But the Supreme Court will be hearing a case out of Colorado for the legality of conversion therapy for licensed practitioners. And so I think that, again, it's not the case is probably not going to go in the way that we want it to. However, this is where we're at, right? And this is where, at least in the U.S. context, conversion practices are not a thing of the past. These are certainly a thing of the present, and unfortunately of the future. Yeah.
So we got to be aware, be engaged, and stay informed. Well, thank you for doing what you're doing. Where can people find your book? What's the best way to get in contact with you, or not contact, but like, where's the best place to get the book, and where can they follow you?
Yeah, so the book is available in the U.S. You can get it through Barnes & Noble. You can get it through bookshop.org. That's maybe the best because they support local bookshops, which is great. Or just go to your local bookstore and say, hey, we'd like to buy this book because it's available. Any bookstore is going to sell it if you request it. And then in Canada through Indigo or through your local bookshop. And then for following, I'm Luke Slam Dunk Wilson on Instagram. I'm Luke Slam Dunk Wilson on Threads. What else? Twitter, I am Wilson_FW, but no one follows Twitter anymore. And then on Blue Sky, I'm Luke Slam Dunk Wilson.
Wow. Just waiting for the TikTok, but we'll get there.
That's it. I have one. I don't use it. Someone sent me a video because I was on this Toronto podcast a few weeks ago. And then someone sent me this message like, look who I found on TikTok. And I was like, oh my gosh, TikTok. I need to get on. I've never really done it. And I don't feel, again, very confident in my technological abilities. So I just think that I'm not going to be able to like really navigate it the way that I think that I navigate Instagram. I love I'm a loser. I do enjoy Instagram quite a bit and I have fun on there. But I think on TikTok, I don't really know how to do it in the same way. I don't know. Maybe I'm goofy, but
well, let me know if you need tips. It's very similar to Instagram, so used to it, but that's another tangent. I guess I'll thank you for being here, and this is a really fun interview. I appreciate you taking your time.
Thank you, Nate. This has been a treat.
Yeah, well, go check out the book, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this episode.